Well, it is the most wonderful time of the year. We have a bracket in hand. Alabama was the number one overall seed, but the committee got the order of the one seeds wrong after that, including picking Purdue as the final one seed.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 or sometimes 7 times per week National College Hoops Show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your co-hosts, Andy Patton and Isaac Shade. So happy to be back with you again. And guess what? We're not talking bubble teams. Well, we are, but we're not talking about who's going to make the bubble. We're not talking about who's going to be the one seed. We know we have the answers to these questions. We are recording this just minutes after the conclusion of the Selection Sunday show. We're going to talk about the seed order for the top 1 seeds, the 2 seeds, all the way through the 4 seeds. We're going to talk about the bubble, what teams did make it in, what teams maybe didn't make it in that should have made it in. We're going to close the show making our gut reaction picks for the Elite Eight and the Final Four. This is just right off the cuff. We're making those predictions for you. That's going to be our roadmap for you today. Isaac, want to start talking about those 1 seeds. Alabama was the number 1 overall 1 seed. Houston, despite losing to Memphis and being without star senior guard Marcus Sasser on Sunday, they are the number 2 1 seed. And then we finished that out with Kansas and the Big Ten champion, albeit barely.
It almost got another buzzer beater.
Yes, Purdue escaped the Big Ten championship game against a very, very motivated, very, very hot Penn State team. They concluded with the final 1 seed. Isaac, before we get into those 2 seeds, 3 seeds, and 4 seeds, I want to start there on the projections and the picks that the committee made for the 1 seeds. What did you think about the order that we got here?
Given the results of what happened during championship week, I think they got it right with Alabama at the top.
Yes.
If, let's say, all 4 of these teams had won, Alabama is the SEC champ, Houston's the AAC champ, Kansas, the Big 12 champ, and Purdue, the Big 10 champ. I think Kansas is the one sitting on top. I think it was that close between these top 3 teams. And that's, you and I have felt that way for a while, that there's this demarcation line between Alabama, Houston, and Kansas. And honestly, I felt pretty comfortable with any order of those 3. But I firmly believe that with Houston not winning the AAC and being without Marcus Sasser, I don't like them as the number 2 overall. And for Kansas, that sends them out to the to the West region instead of to the Midwest, which Houston got. They're in Kansas City, like an hour and a half away from Lawrence. And so, at the very least, Kansas losing to Texas in the Big 12 championship game cost them that number 1 seed in the Midwest. That stinks. But regardless, I think the committee got it wrong. And I know it's splitting hairs, but I believe Kansas should be 2, Houston 3. And then we had that next demarcation line between Purdue, UCLA, and Texas. Those were the 3 teams we were kind of looking at in that final number 1 seed and the top 2 seeds. The top 2 seeds, if you know what I'm saying. We both had Texas there. Purdue, by virtue of winning the Big 10, does claim that final number 1 seed. Texas won the Big 12. UCLA, we know, lost to Arizona in the Pac-12 championship game, and we don't know how much, at this point anyway, we don't know how much those wins and losses affected things. But I still would have Texas having beaten Purdue, even with a couple more losses. I think their resume is stronger, and I think they're playing better basketball.
I'm not surprised that Purdue got that final spot, to be clear. Like, I think that was kind of trending that direction. But Texas, it feels like Texas beating Kansas impacted Kansas in a fairly significant way, where they lost a spot, but it didn't really seem to do much for Texas. I mean, we had that mark with them and Purdue and UCLA. They finished 3rd out of that group in terms of seeding. They were listed as the second 2 seed behind UCLA. And again, they have 8 losses. I understand that the resume was, when you compare it to UCLA and Purdue, it's close. There's a reason that we have them kind of all grouped together. But for me, it felt like they weren't given any kind of advantage from winning that game. And I think the Longhorns, not only do they get, the second 2 seed, their draw is pretty tough. They got the 7-10 matchup in their region is Texas A&M, a team that I think was a little bit underseeded and that I think is has been playing some pretty good basketball as of late. And then the 10 seed, there's Penn State. Penn State's one of the hottest teams in college basketball right now. They're not winning by a lot. They're winning a lot of close games, but looking at some of the other 7-10s in Michigan State and USC is another one. Like, I would rather be the 2 seed facing off against the winner of Michigan State and USC than the 2 seed facing off against the winner between Texas A&M and Penn State. And so Texas kind of doesn't get a particularly great draw here. And I think, I don't think it's egregious by any stretch of the imagination. And I understand Purdue, Big Ten champions, number 1 ranked team for huge chunks of the season. I get why they ended up getting that final spot. But I thought that if I was Texas, I'd be a little frustrated with what we ended up getting here.
I would as well. I also want to go back to Kansas having the draw in the West now. If the seeds hold, you look at the bottom of that West bracket, the 2 seed, UCLA, seed, Gonzaga. I know Kansas fans are going to travel well, Andy, but if they make it to the regional final, they're either probably going to be facing Gonzaga or UCLA, who is going to be a lot closer to home in Las Vegas than Kansas will. And so, I mean, that is a tough for being the number 3 seed. Who is like, no, because I guess they wouldn't have wanted to go to Madison Square Garden to the East. So, I mean, that makes sense as the 3 seed, but that really impacted it. Kansas being the 3 overall instead of the 2.
Agreed. I think Kansas is probably going to be fine. They're a really, really talented team. I think you could make a very strong argument for them being the still favorite despite having lost to Texas. I think just top to bottom, they're a really talented team, but it's a tougher draw for them. And you look kind of further down, I think there's some other interesting things that we saw shake out. Marquette gets that 2 seed against Purdue. I think that they have a pretty decent draw, pretty good opportunity to potentially advance well. They'll have to get by Kansas State, who's the 3 seed on the East region there. And then Tennessee, who's the 4 seed there. So the East region is very fascinating to me. Purdue, Marquette, Kansas State, Tennessee. I think you could make a strong argument for any of those teams coming out of that region. And guess what? Duke is the 5 seed. It could be any of those teams. It could also be Duke. Like, I think there's a very real possibility that this really, really on fire young team out of Duke, John Shire's team, I think they have a really good chance of potentially making some serious noise in the East region and potentially pulling off a couple upsets.
It could be a lot of fun there. Now, Andy, in total, I know we quibbled with the order of the 1 seeds. We had talked quite a bit about, we felt comfortable with who those top 8 teams were going to be.
Yeah.
Being Alabama, Houston, Kansas, Purdue, UCLA, Texas, Arizona, and Marquette in some order. And that's exactly what happened. So in terms of like, did the right 8 teams get on the top 2 lines? I think we would both agree that they did. The one interesting thing is that we both thought Gonzaga would be like that next team out as the 9th overall seed in the S curve, but it actually was Baylor. And that's really interesting to me that they got that much recognition over Gonzaga. I thought the Bulldogs had done enough to be just right on the cusp of being that 4th 2 seed. But it turns out it was Baylor that was a little bit closer. And so, the Big 12 showed out as we anticipated that they would. Andy, anything you want to say on these top 4 seeds, the top 16 overall?
I think they got the full 16 correct. I was just looking at who the 5 seeds are. The only team that I think may quibble with it a little bit is Duke. And I think Duke has an argument for a 4 seed, but I thought a 5 seed was totally fine. San Diego State didn't deserve higher than a 5 seed. I think they're fine where they are. Miami,
that's well slotted.
You could make an argument potentially for Miami, but with the injury that they have right now, I'm not sure that I see that. St. Mary's, I don't think was going to get higher than a 5 seed. I think that was kind of the peak for them. So I think they got the 16 right. There's nobody in that group that I think, they didn't deserve to be there. I think UConn, Tennessee, Indiana, Virginia are all very quality 4 seeds. So shout out to the committee. I think they got the top 16 teams right, and we can quibble on the order, and we will, and we are. But for the most part, I think that there wasn't any egregious mistakes, at least out of the top 4 seeds here.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we will do a lot more of that over the coming days leading up to Thursday. We're going to break these individual regions down in greater detail. We just want to give some overview looks at it today. So speaking of being left out or making it into these top 16, that's where we want to go next. And going back to the bubble, who made it in that we didn't expect, who got kicked out that we thought would be in. That's some of the more fun stuff to talk about. And we'll get there in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. The Built Bar March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know I'm going to be voting for that churro bar because it is unbelievable. And if you want your favorite team to win, then you'll be voting as well. Support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote, listen to this. You will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners or watchers will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one lucky Locked On fan will get a 12-month subscription to Built, where you get your favorite bar or puff delivered monthly straight to your protein bar ever. It's so amazing. You won't think it's good for you, but it is. Why is it so good? Well, part of the reason it's covered in 100% real chocolate. So folks, run to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Andy, the folks, let's ask them to grab their bracket and go listen to the Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown, which we're about to record as soon as we finish this show, one after another after another. It's awesome. We love getting to hang out with you guys. National analysis and the insights from our local experts. Our bracket breakdown has everything you need to make the most informed decisions on your bracket. Find the episode on Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. So, Andy, where we want to move next is the bubble. We've been talking about it for weeks, looking at last four buys, last four in, first four out, next four out, all of that kind of stuff. I want to start with the biggest surprise to me, but it is one that you, my friend, talked about last night, Saturday night. You said, I just looked. I know we have Arizona State and Oklahoma State right on the cut line with one probably in and one probably out. But there was a little team that wedged right in between them and was the last team in this bracket, and that was the Nevada Wolfpack. Andy, what made you relook at this resume and say, I think that team, at least their resume, is better than Arizona State or Oklahoma State?
Well, the net rankings absolutely love them. And I know that they're not necessarily predictive, but the net has them 37th right now. This was a team that really, really excellent at home. They went 13-1 at home this season. Really excellent there at 4-5 in quad one games, which I'm not going to pretend that's great, but we're talking about bubble teams. Bubble teams are always kind of usually in that conversation. 3-3 quad two. So you could look at that and say, well, they don't have a winning record quad one or quad two. They were 15-2 otherwise. I think this is a talented team. Jared Lucas is fantastic, 17.5 points per game, shooting 38% from deep. They have three guys over 13 points per game, so they can kill you a lot of different ways. A decent three-point shooting team. Like, I think that this team, I'm not sure that I have them making a bunch of noise. Like, I think that I would have picked them above Arizona State from a resume perspective. However, now that these two teams are actually going to face off against each other, I think I probably lean Arizona State in a head-to-head matchup. That's kind of what makes these conversations so interesting, because you do want to factor in resume. You do want to factor in some of that stuff. And Arizona State's doesn't have a great resume from a net perspective. Their KenPom rankings are fairly low. I think they're 68th in the KenPom. Nevada is 43rd. So Nevada's got, that going for them. They have the net rankings going for them. I do think Arizona State's got a really, really talented backcourt, and I think they're probably going to win that game. But I do think Nevada absolutely deserved to get that spot, and I'm glad that they did.
Yeah. And then when we look at the flip side of that, Andy, the biggest snub to me when I look at this, Rutgers. Yeah. Rutgers had tumbled in recent weeks, but they had done some work down the stretch here in the Big Ten tournament. And I thought, frankly, it was going to be enough to keep them in. Like, I thought they were, hand up, I thought they were closer to last four buys than first four out, right? Like, that's where I was at on Rutgers. And so as you and I were doing a live bracket reveal show, and in real time, we were looking at, okay, we got the whole bracket now, who's in, who's out. It didn't even occur to me that Rutgers would be out until we looked back at our Andy. There's no Rutgers on this list. Rutgers did not make this tournament. What are we doing here? And so, like 35th at KenPom. They lost to Purdue, obviously, close game. But I guess it was just too much losing down the stretch there and finishing with that 10-10 record in the Big Ten. And so I guess I can't too much fight with the committee on it, but it just surprised me in a big way.
They had a 2-6 stretch towards the end of the Big Ten regular season where their only wins were at Wisconsin by 1 point, at Penn State, which actually aged fairly well.
Yeah.
But that at Penn State by 3 points. Otherwise, they had losses to Northwestern, which you can deal with, Indiana, which you can certainly deal with, Illinois, but then you have Nebraska loss, you have a Michigan loss, and then you have a Minnesota loss.
There it is. That's
the one. I think that's the one that really did it. Earlier in the season, they were playing much better earlier in the year, but they still, they have a loss to Ohio State. They had when they were ranked, mind you, a loss to Seton Hall. Like the resume was just not consistent enough. I was a little surprised they were left off. And certainly, every time, for those of you who don't do this, one of my favorite rituals, go to KenPom right after the bracket comes out. You can look at the website and he's got every team that made the tournament highlighted in kind of a salmon color.
That's
what it is. It's a salmon color. And so what you can do is you can see like the teams, the highest teams that did not make the tournament. Rutgers at 35th in the KenPom rankings. They're the number 1 team. Number 2, Oklahoma State. They were the top 2 teams, according to CBS, that didn't make the tournament. And they are the top 2 teams in KenPom. It's not a surprise to see those 2 teams there, but I don't think there's there's an argument for Rutgers over Arizona State or over Pitt or maybe even over Nevada. I think you can make that argument, but I don't think it's egregious that they didn't make the field.
Yeah. Another team that fell further than either of us thought they would is Providence. Now, Providence was it was either they or NC State was the last bye. I haven't seen the full S curve yet to know where it all came out. But folks, if you're not sure of this, the way you can know who the last at-larges are is when you have the play-in games at the 11 slot. And so that means it's Mississippi State, Pitt, Arizona State, and Nevada. But the 11 seeds that aren't in a play-in game, that's the last 2 byes. Yeah. And so that we know that that's NC State and Providence in some order. I think NC State got a little bit of a boost more than I thought they would, especially after losing to Clemson in the ACC tournament there. But Providence has really kind of fallen off a little bit lately. I mean, heck, they're lower than Rutgers, Oklahoma State, and Oregon at KenPom, what we were just talking about. But Providence too has kind of stumbled down the stretch here. At one point, they were 10-3 in the Big Ten, but finished 13-7 with quite a few losses down the stretch. Did I say Big Ten? Big East, excuse me if I said Big Ten. And then losing to UConn in their first game of the Big East tournament. So I think Providence took a little bit of a spill there, losing 4 of their final 5. And so, Andy, any other surprises as you look at the bubble area?
Not really, to be honest. I think the biggest surprise in terms of actually discussing teams that are in and out is the fact that North Carolina was listed as one of the 3 first 4 out. We talked about Oklahoma State and Rutgers. I think they very clearly deserve to be the top 2 teams who didn't make the field. North Carolina was listed next, ahead of Clemson, ahead of Michigan, ahead of Oregon, ahead of Ohio State. They probably deserve to be in that mix. But being ahead of all of those teams, a little surprising. Does it matter? No, not really. North Carolina didn't make the NCAA tournament. They're not playing in the NIT.
Real time.
So I'm not shocked by this information. I'm not shocked that North Carolina, I'm certainly not shocked that they didn't make the field. I don't think they deserve to be in, but I was a little surprised that they got as much consideration as they did. But in terms of which teams made it, which teams didn't make it, I think that this is more or less what I would have expected.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder if North Carolina had beaten Virginia in the ACC quarterfinals, what would it have done? But when you look, it's interesting. I hadn't realized it until you were just saying it. North Carolina beat Clemson head-to-head in their one matchup this year. Yeah. They beat Ohio State head-to-head in their one matchup this year, and they beat Michigan head-to-head. And so I'm not saying that's what determines this order, but I'm sure it certainly plays a role in it.
Well, Isaac, we're going to give you gut check, just right off the cuff, less than an hour from the end of Selection Sunday. We're going to talk about our Elite 8 predictions, our Final 4 predictions. Again, we're going to have so much more breakdown of this bracket, each individual region, as we go along this week and get closer and closer to the start of the game starting on Tuesday, and then, of course, the full game starting on Thursday. But before we get into that, today's episode of the Locked On College Basketball Podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NCAA tournament is here. We have brackets in hand, and now is the perfect time for you to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. Maybe you want to get in on the action immediately and you have thoughts about Pitt versus Mississippi State or Nevada versus Arizona. You can toss those bets up as soon as Tuesday. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Isaac, gut check time. Let's talk Elite Eight, Final Four, just an overall look at the bracket, where the teams are right now before we get too deep into individual matchups, KenPom ratings. Obviously, some health of some of these guys is going to be a big factor as we get closer and closer to some of those Sweet 16 Elite Eight matchups. Is Marcus Sasser going to be healthy, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to just kind of start, and I'm going to start with you talking about, let's just go region by region. Who do you have playing each other in the Elite Eight out of the East region? And then I'll give you my picks, and we'll just kind of go from there.
East region. By the way, Andy, what a time to be alive. Andy said it earlier, this is Sunday night. We're recording this right after the bracket show. Thursday's Christmas Day. Tonight is Christmas Eve. Yeah. I got milk and cookies for Santa. Give me some of that lemon Oreo in celebration of North Carolina being out of this tournament.
Being done. Just done.
They packed it in. The East bracket, Andy. This is a bracket loaded with basketball royalty.
Yeah.
So many national championships in this bracket. So many name recognition teams, and I love that it's the East bracket going to MSG for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. I have Duke coming out of the top of it, where they will play Marquette. I would love it to be Duke, Kentucky at MSG, but I've got Marquette beating Duke in the Elite 8 to go to the Final Four. Houston, what about you in the East, Andy?
Well, I picked the one that you wanted. I'm going with Duke and Kentucky, the bluest of blue bloods. And there are so many people out there who just hate that. And you know what? I get it. I wouldn't love it either, but I think that there's a very reasonable chance. And it's a 5 seed versus 6 seed. I think it's more hateable if it's 1 seed Duke versus 2 seed Kentucky in the Elite 8 matchup. You're just kind of like, oh, great, it's another one of these. But at least they're not the highest seeds. Obviously we've talked about Kentucky's struggles this year a bunch. We've also talked about Duke's struggles on the show quite a bit. And now they're both two teams that seem to be kind of peaking at the right time. And I think there's a reasonable opportunity for these two teams to play each other in that matchup. And if they do, I'm leaning Duke and the youth of Kyle Filipowski and Mark Mitchell and veteran presence of Jeremy Roach. I think there's a chance that Kentucky would win that Duke would win that game over Kentucky and advance to the Final Four.
Well, Andy, let's move to which region does the East? The East plays the South. So let's go to the South because that's who matches up in the Final Four. Andy, I'll start. Give me Bama coming out of the top. I just do not see a single team, with all due respect to San Diego State and Virginia. Again, these are gut reactions. I think Bama is playing well again. They raced through the SEC tournament, winning by like 23, 11, and 19. So great stuff there. I have Baylor coming out of the bottom. I just think their guards might be able to overwhelm Arizona in the Sweet 16. But then I have Bama just too much for Baylor in the Elite 8.
I also have Alabama with the same reasoning. I think it's hard for me to imagine Bama's not in the Elite Eight with the seed that they got. I mean, they're the number 1 seed for a reason. You're supposed to get a quote unquote easier run, and I think Bama got that. And I think they have a great opportunity to be in that Elite Eight game. I have them playing Arizona. You mentioned Baylor's guards being able to overwhelm Arizona, and I understand that. But I think the flip side is that Baylor hasn't been able to guard a single post player all year long.
That's right.
And now they have to guard Azuolas Tubelis and Umar Ballo. Arizona's guards are not great. They have been kind of questionable throughout the year, and we've seen them be pretty inconsistent.
They're bigs.
Yeah. No, Arizona's guards have been inconsistent.
I'm sorry. I thought you said Baylor's guards. I was like, no, Andy, you're wrong.
No, Baylor's guards have been darn good all year long, just like Arizona's bigs.
I misheard you. I apologize, brother.
I think Arizona's going to advance past Baylor. I think they're going to play Alabama, and I think we're going to see the first 100 is going to win that game because I think that they're really high-flying offensive teams. Bama's a better defensive team. But give me Arizona. Give me Arizona. Charles Bediako is a great post player. He's a great post defender for Alabama. I think he's got a good opportunity to kind of slow down Umar Ballo a little bit, but I think Bama's going to have a hard time with Azuolas Tubelis. And I think there's a reasonable, I think Arizona has a reasonable chance of advancing to the Final Four and putting Tommy Lloyd's name even more on the map as one of the most up-and-coming coaches in the entire NCAA.
What a first 2-year run that would be in the desert. Andy, let's move to the Midwest. Houston, the number 2 overall seed. What do you have coming out this bracket?
You say West or Midwest? I missed it.
I said Midwest.
Midwest. Let's talk about the Midwest. I got Texas again as the 2 seed down there. I think they have a decent. I think they kind of got a tough run with Texas A&M and Penn State, but I think that they're going to advance past that. I think they're going to continue advancing. I think they're going to play Miami. And part of this is a lack of knowledge right now about Marcus Sasser's injury. That's a big part of it. If he's healthy, Houston has a better chance of advancing, but guard play really helps in the NCAA tournament. Marcus Sasser, Jamal Shead is a fantastic backcourt. Jamal Shead and Terrence Arsenault, a very, very good backcourt. Does it compete with Isaiah Wong and Nigel Pack? No. I think it's fair to say no in that conversation. Shead and Sasser probably does, but Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong are really good. We have to make sure that they're fully healthy, but I think Miami has a chance to be in that game. And I think if we get a Texas versus Miami matchup, holy guard play, Batman. That's going to be a really fun matchup between those guards in those 2 games. But I would take Texas, and I think there's a good chance that Texas is the team that ends up in the Final Four out of the Midwest.
Well, this is the one that we agree on. I also have Texas over Miami in this Elite 8. I'm assuming that Norchad Omier is going to be good to go for the Hurricanes. It was an ankle injury he suffered. He's not an above the rim big. He's a guy that clears out space and is just kind of like an offensive rebounding juggernaut, but he doesn't need his athleticism to do it. He's just good with space. So I think particularly if Marcus Sasser's not fully healthy, which I just don't think he will be, man, groins, that's so hard to come back from and trust to make those quick cuts and stuff. So same thing for me, Texas over Miami. And Mr. Andy, that leaves us with the West bracket. Who do you have in the West?
Well, I got Kansas, which, you got to pick some 1 seeds, right? I picked a few 1 seeds to advance here. Kansas, I think this is a nice draw for them. Arkansas is a team that I think could give them some legitimate trouble in the second round there as an 8 seed. With no disrespect to St. Mary's or UConn, I don't see them beating Kansas. Kansas has so much athletes. They're a really well-coached team. We hope, of course, that Bill Self is healthy enough to return to the sideline and coach those games in the NCAA tournament. And I think they're going to play Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga is going to come out of the bottom half of that region. I think they got a decent draw here with either TCU, Arizona State, or Nevada. I think they win against either of those teams, assuming, of course, they get past Grand Canyon. TCU would be without Eddie Lampkin, who is their big post player. If you don't have a post defender on your team and you're playing Drew Timme, that's going to be an issue for you. Gonzaga UCLA is a nice rematch from 2021. That's certainly going to be a hard matchup for both teams, but I think, especially without Jalen Clark for the Bruins, I think Gonzaga can advance there, play Kansas. And I think that's where the Zags' lucks run out. I think Kansas would take that one. They're such a difficult team on both ends of the floor that I think we'd end up with Gonzaga, Kansas in the Elite 8, Kansas advancing to the Final Four.
Andy, as I look at this bracket, it's the one of the 4 where I just feel best about the 4, like the top 4 seeds advancing to the regional semifinals. And I'm actually taking the lower 2 seeds. I'm going to go with UConn to beat Kansas because I think that inside we're going to just have too much Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan for, like if it was Kalina Azubuike. No, who am I thinking of from Kansas? Not David McCormick from last year, the big man. Anyway, Kansas doesn't have one of their typical like stout dudes inside to take it up. And so I think that UConn's going to have a little too much. 1 game scenario, who knows what's going to happen. And then I've got Gonzaga over UCLA without Jalen Clark. And then because it's in the West, give me Gonzaga over UConn to win this bracket and move on to the Final Four. Andy, we have a bracket. We've got some Final Four predictions. I love it. I love to see it. Those of you listening in and watching who are screaming at me, whoever it was I was just trying to think of for Kansas, let us know because I'm going to kick myself as soon as I realize who it is. That's it for today's show. Make sure you review us on iTunes. Make sure to subscribe, smash the like button, and comment. As always, apologies to the lawyer family as we get out of here. And until tomorrow, peace.